Fresh Blood, Chapter 3. Nathan watched the rhythmic movement of the windscreen wipers, and listened to the thump-thump as they swept away the morning drizzle. He watched the cars on the road as they worked their way back towards the station. The rivulets of water running down the screen left the world outside blurred, distorted. Red brake lights glowed and flared, shapes warped and twisted through the water. Thump-thump. The world was clear again, if only for a few moments. Clarity wasn't necessarily a good thing, he mused. The only clarity he'd felt since he woke this morning was when he'd seen Joe carrying that damned coat. He tried to piece together the events of the morning, tried to convince himself he had misremembered, that the events had taken place in a different order. Tested himself to see if he could recall the exact sequence of events, but every time he did, the pieces fell together the same way. He'd known about the coat before he'd seen it, not guessed, not imagined, known. Every time he put the pieces of his jigsaw puzzle brain together, it came together the same way, an impossible way. Nathan had been a police officer for a long time, 14 years now since he'd left the army, 14 years of learning to notice the right things, learning to discount the wrong things. Learning to understand that when your gut said one thing and your brain agreed that it was probably something worth noticing. 14 years of seeing coincidences fall into place and recognizing true coincidence was something that merited more examination. He tried to think it through. How could he have known? Had he seen the woman before? Had he seen her in that coat? He had to have done, but where? When he finished work yesterday, he had driven home and stayed in the apartment all evening in case Annie called. Nothing else. No, wait. He'd called by the market, picked up dinner. Had she been there? He thought back. No, not that he could remember. Tony in the back room of the shop calling through to talk. The kid behind the counter. Old Mrs. Haverty shopping with her husband, whose name Nathan could never remember. That was it. No, one other, some guy down the back end of the shop that Nathan didn't see properly. But no woman in a red coat. So how could he have known? How? He shook his head and sighed. "You all right there, buddy?" asked Joe, his eyes turning from the road for a moment. Nathan looked across at his partner, shrugged. "You've not seemed right since the murder scene. You okay, Nate? Not like you to let these things get to you?" Nathan felt relieved. Joe just thought he was acting like a rookie, like Kennedy had back at the murder scene, shifting around from foot to foot, trying to look away from the body but not make it look obvious. At the same time, he didn't know why he should feel relieved. It was as if he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't, maybe thinking something he shouldn't. There was some truth in that, Nathan thought. He wasn't thinking about the case, he was thinking about himself. Looking inwardly when he should be looking at evidence. Thinking about where this woman could have fitted into his quiet night at home, watching television, eating homemade stir-fry and waiting for the phone to ring. Just lack of sleep, Joe, that's all. Nathan had been in a haze since seeing the red coat. He'd supervised the crime scene, running on automatic while his head whirled. Kennedy had found the woman's handbag, but there was no sign of her missing shoe. They'd left officers still tracing the area for any more clues, but Nathan wasn't hopeful they'd find anything. The clues there had dried up, he knew it. Door to door was proving fruitless too. Wrong kind of neighborhood to get information. The victim had doubtless been shouting, screaming for help, but the nearest doors they knocked on only brought faces with sullen and cooperative stares or bristling attitudes that weren't going to offer much information. Her driving license was in her handbag. Stacy Morgan, 28 years old. A New York State license, one of the older kinds of cards without the biometric data. She'd had it since before 2008, so just the basic information on it. Date of birth, eye color, height, no exemptions or restrictions, and her address. Over in Yonkers, which was a long way away from where she was found, so there was no explanation of why she died in a scrub park the better part of 45 minutes' drive away from her home. Boyfriend, girlfriend maybe. Some uniforms in the Yonkers area were on the way to the address to check it out. Nathan and Joe would head out there if there was someone to talk to. Nathan glanced out the rain-streaked window as Joe swung the car into the precinct lot. Back to the office. He trailed Joe as they hurried crisply across the lot out of the rain, and then past the desk where old Sergeant Brower nodded them by and up the stairs to the detective unit. Columbusville Precinct House was an elderly station house. Modern safety features, such as screens to protect the officers dealing with the public, jarring with the old brick and old wood furnishings for the rest of the building. The staircases were old. An attempt to enforce a city edict for wheelchair access had come to a rude halt in this building. A ground-floor back office was the best concession they could make when the inspector left his head shaking. The electrics would need to be hauled out and replaced if it weren't for the fact that hadn't solved the occasional light dips the first 5 times it was tried. In short, the building was long past its best, and long overdue for replacement. Nathan loved it. It might not be the sleekest office or the best equipped, but he loved the history of the building. She was solid, and she'd seen a lot of stories in her time. He remembered the first time he'd come in here, but that was 20 years ago, back before lots of things. "What's the word?" Captain Soto was waiting for them. Captain Ernesto Soto Castillo had been the precinct captain for the past 4 years. Long enough to earn his team's respect, a little too long for a man with ambition. "Victim was by the name of Sophie Morgan," replied Nathan. 28 years old. Amelia's got her on the way to the morgue. Post-mortem will tell us more, but looks like we're 3 for 3, interrupted Joe, that eagerness back in his voice. "Tell me more," said Soto. "Early days, sir," said Nathan. "I'm not going to argue with Joe. Looks the same as the first 2, but there's nothing else immediately apparent to give us a link to the other victims. Each of the victims has been found in the borough, but we've got nothing obvious linking them. How the killer's choosing them, we don't know yet. We've got uniforms out at the Vic's address. They'll call in soon. We're going to gather some information about her from here before we head up there. It's up in Yonkers, so we don't know yet why she was here. She was killed at the scene, but no real evidence on site, just like the last 2, and nobody's talking on the door-to-door." Soto chewed his lip. "She know her attacker, do you think?" Nathan heard Joe start to answer, heard him start to tell the captain how they couldn't say, knew that was the answer the evidence showed. But still Nathan found himself speaking up, cutting Joe off. "No, sir, she didn't. But he knew her." Soto eyed him up. "You have a basis for that?" he asked. How could Nathan tell him? How could he tell the captain that all he had was a gut feeling and a fevered dream? "Nothing I can share yet, sir, but Look, let me tell you when I've got the facts to back it up, okay?" Soto's cool, appraising gaze met that of Nathan's. After what seemed an age, he nodded, ever so slightly. "We've got a 3rd girl dead and no answers. You 2 get me some before the media shitstorm starts up. We've got a little time, but not a lot. You need extra manpower. You can pull in Cammy and Rattledge. Take some time to bring them up to speed. You need any more, you knock on my door, you hear?" Nathan nodded, Joe the same, and with that, Soto was away, sharp shoes clipping briskly back to his office. Joe watched him go, then turned his gaze back to Nathan, that slightly hangdog expression on his face that came to him when he had something he wanted to know. "What was that about, Nathan?" he asked at length. "He knew her? Where are you pulling that one from?" Nathan couldn't tell the captain, and he sure as hell couldn't tell Joe.